discussions of the day. I think that's one of the great India-Britain things we have in common is nothing happens without tea. So my apologies for those of you who didn't manage tea. Well, I'm very pleased now to announce our next two speakers, both of whom I've known for a long time. Som Batabyal, who teaches at SOAS here, and has also published his first novel in 2011, The Price You Pay, which was very well received, and it's taken him 13 very long years to write his next, so we won't ask him what he was doing during lockdown, Red River. I think, and I've heard very warm reports of this novel, and he's going to be moderated by Olivia Fraser, who melds the formal traditions of Indian miniature painting with repetitive meditative motives. She's Delhi-based, and she's created a distinct visual language, and her work is in the Museum of Sacred Art in Brussels and the Kiran Nadar Museum of Art in Delhi and in my house. And she's exhibited widely in the UK and the USA and across South Asia, where she's lived since 1989. And is your book available here, Olivia?
It's available through Amazon.
Only through Amazon. It's called A Journey Within, and not available here. And so I believe your book's not available here. It is available here, and it's not available here otherwise. So this is the place to pick it up. So welcome on stage to both of our speakers. And you have 45 minutes, if I can count, for your session. And I'll appear here when you've got 5 minutes left.
Thank you, Rich. Yes.
So welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming. And this is the book we're going to be talking about, Red River, an absolutely cracker of a book. As Rachel was saying, Som has taken 13 years to write this book. And it's an epic book. It's epic in scale, richly rooted in the sort of fractured borderlands of the northeast of India, and in the borderlands of friendship and love, and the fracturing geographies of where you're from, Som. And so my first question really is, how personal to you is this story? Was it born out of a need to understand your own identity?
The story is personal in so much as it is rooted in Guwahati, and it's about 3 boys growing up, and one of them is a Bengali. So that part of it is, as far as the story goes, that resembles my life. But what happens to the principal characters, their journey, is not really, doesn't correspond to my life at all, what happens to Samar. But in the larger overall scheme of things, being a migrant in Assam, being a Bengali in Assam in the 80s was a very difficult time. We were called Bongals, the outsider, because there was an anti-Bangladesh movement which got conflated with anyone being Bengali, though my father was from Dhaka before partition happened. So in that sense, there was trying to understand that story. I also wanted to understand in a sense that, when I look back at my childhood now, I thought it was a very happy childhood. But given the amount of violence that was so prevalent every day, in our lives, we would have signs like on the bus, which would say, "Look under your seat, there could be a bomb." And, no one looked under the seat, but there would be blasts in a marketplace, and all you were worried about is your father safe or your friends safe, and once they came back home, you forgot. So I just wanted to understand how we normalize such violence, and especially given what's happening in Palestine today, in Ukraine, in so many wars. So childhood, happy childhoods, normal lives in this horrorscape of violence. That I was trying to make sense of that.
Yeah, yeah. And against this very fractured and sort of politically sort of
Charged, yeah,
background,
absolutely, absolutely.
You've created a wonderful story.
Thank you.
And it's kind of alive with a kind of joyous texture against having to look under your seat in the bus and all that, which in fact comes into the story. It's got noise, it's got clamour, it's got a lot of song.
Yes.
And of course storytelling, lots of stories. And I love the way the book opens with the village being brought together in 1983 with a television arriving, because everybody needs to watch the World Cup cricket match with India, and cricket plays a big role in this in your story. And I'm just wondering, sort of, how you thought of it. What was your idea with cricket and with this added texture to?
You know, that particular moment of, I guess all of us of a certain age remember 1983 June, India winning the Cricket World Cup, beating West Indies. I remember it vividly because most of our houses in our neighborhoods didn't have television. There would be one house which would have a television set, and we would all go to that house, stand outside windows, and people would be very generous. You know, tea would come, water would come, and you know, the household that had the television, the rich household, would open their doors. And so that was, I remember that very vividly. And so I wanted to play on that. Of course, this is set in a different fictional village in Upper Assam. That was one. The other thing about cricket is cricket has defined Indian nation like no other sport, no other song, no other film. You know, the last, post-1983, what has happened with cricket is so identifiable with the growth, or whatever we want to call it, of how India is imagined. And this book is much about the nation state itself. I wanted to think about the nation state and how it makes us, kowtow to whatever it demands, and its demands are many, especially states like India. So both played a lot of part. So the childhood moment, the joy of India winning and watching 100 people from the neighborhood watching it late into the evening, about 12:30 or 1 o'clock at night, when we finally knew that India had won. That was quite some, it remained very much etched in memory. And I was very surprised to find how correct I was with details, what time the television went off, what time the news came on, what we couldn't see. I remembered it as I checked on, now, it was pretty much etched in memory.
Yes. And it's a universal language, isn't it? Sport. You go anywhere.
Sport, yes, absolutely.
And particularly sports. You can just talk, particularly cricket. You can just talk about cricket.
Any sport, it could be rugby here, or it could be baseball in America, or basketball. And it kind of defines nationhood.
Yes, so and it brings communities together.
Media and sports. And the spectacle is.
And it's a way of two oppositions actually sort of doing something in a civilized way, in the same way as there's so much going on where people are absolutely throwing bombs at each other and all the rest of it.
But still can play together.
But they can still play, and still play together. And your epic tale focuses on three main characters whose friendship and their lives, we follow their lives through the story of this book from when they're sort of young teenagers, and they're Samar, Rizu and Rana. And we get very close to these three. Can you talk about them a bit, the three, what their backgrounds are, how different they all are, and yet they manage to have this extraordinary friendship?
Right. Yes. I mean, the book starts with with 3 chapters called Our Parents' Stories. That's parents of the 3 boys. One family, the Bengali boys' family, is a refugee family from Bangladesh post-1971, and they're coming there. The second family is an army man's family, and their son being in Guwahati, because the army comes into Guwahati in the very early 90s. And the third is a separatist family, or the Alpha sympathizer. While these 3 boys are very real, the stories are very real, again, as I was telling you, Olivia, I wanted to think through the idea of the nation. So one was the refugee who wants to belong to the nation, who's desperate to belong. The other is the believer, the army man, or the soldier, who fights for the nation. And the third is the separatist who wants to tear away from the national fabric and the national imagination. So playing on these three tropes, these boys were created in a sense that, it kind of defines nationhood at different margins.
But they're so alive with their sort of little struggles, who sits next to who in class, what they do after class, where they go and play, who joins which kind of, team, and the other one is left out.
Yes. And Happy Childhood is a fiction, in one sense, that when you really think about it, all the things you've been left out of, you've been teased for, the names that have been, called out to you. So I just kind of, what I did, I remember just years ago, before starting to write on this book, I went away for about 7 days and wrote 100 things I could remember from childhood, and the trauma that brought up just suddenly, transformed into trauma and joy, both, and joy and love.
Well, all of that is absolutely, but I'm just at the moment just talking about the kind of the joy of childhood, because that absolutely comes through, and you really, really bring it across. And within it, you've got the little niggles, but they're skiving off school. They're playing sports and getting jealous of each other in sports.
Talking about skiving of school, and this is where the personal comes in. My headmaster once called my father to his office, and my father used to be perpetually outside my headmaster's office. And he said, "Your son has attended 27 days of school this whole year." My father couldn't believe it. He said, "Where do you go?" And I used to go and sit by the river. And that's exactly what I used to do. And pretty much these two boys just sit and stare at the Brahmaputra. I just loved. And I used to think I was by the Mississippi and thinking of Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer.
Yes. You're a dreamer. The theme of belonging and of identity runs through the novel. It's something that's so relevant to everybody, all our lives today. We're all sort of, where are we all from? Who are we? If I'm a Brit living in India, where does that mean I'm from? And all of that. And it's on both a kind of personal, you show this both in a very personal way with, as I was saying, Samar, one of the three main protagonists, and whether he sort of fits into things. He runs too slowly. He kind of, he's a bit too fat and all that kind of thing. And then on the political level, can you talk about that, about identity and how important that is really as a theme in the novel?
And I'll start from the personal.
Yeah.
My father passed about 11 years ago, and he left Dhaka with his mother and his brother, who was 4 years old. He was 6, and his mother was then pregnant, and they kind of traveled to Calcutta in these very turbulent times. And he never spoke about it to me. He wouldn't speak about Bangladesh, growing up in a refugee colony in Calcutta, and his life. That part of the life was just kept silent. So when he was very unwell, and we knew that he wouldn't have very many days, I'd gone to Calcutta and I asked him, "Will you please tell me your stories? I really want to know." And he told me a great many things. But one of the things which has stayed with me now that I have a son who is now 10. He said, I was 6 and I was staying in this refugee colony, and every day, for 10 years, till he was 16, I asked my mother, "Ma, Dhaka kobe jabu?" So when do we return? And this broke me, this thing of a young child asking the mother, "When can I return home?" And then you see the stories of the migrants, how they are framed. No migrant would get on the sea with their child if it was safer to be on land. So this question kind of started this story about identity. And though my father comes from Dhaka, I'm sorry, that just kind of, this is the first time I've told this story, it just breaks me. This, Ma Dhaka kobe jamu is such a... But though he comes from, lives in Calcutta and then moves during his working years to Guwahati, the man never spoke a word of Assamese, and he always spoke in his Bengal dialect, which is the Dhaka dialect. He just refused to leave. Even when he tried once to go back to Dhaka, but he returned from the borders, because he said, "If I go back, my leaving would become permanent." But here is the problem. He came and lived in Assam, and his entire reaction to Assam and Assamese is, I don't want to know, right? And this pervaded me as a child who wanted to be an Assamese, who wanted to belong. And I always felt in Assam that I am the outsider. When I'm out with my friends, when I'm at home, my father says, we'll go back to Calcutta. So you kind of live in this borderlands, in this fences, and you never really belong. So all of this started to play out for a long time. And then, it took 13 years to kind of play out again on this book. Yeah.
Well, fantastic. And then on a political level, the whole business of the, I mean, it's such an extraordinary. The Northeast has had so many divisions, hasn't it?
Yeah.
It's had all these different...
1,000 cuts.
Yes.
So, I mean, those of you who know the Northeast, the fractures are so many that it's very difficult to talk about here. Assam, one of the main present day, there have been many ancient problems, but the present day post-70s conversation has been around the partition of Pakistan into Bangladesh and the influx of migrants. And once upon a time, it was one country, and then suddenly many Bangladeshi migrants came into Assam and came into Calcutta, came into Delhi, but Assam became very difficult to manage. And the anti-foreigner movement pervaded our childhood. And though I was from India, from West Bengal, being a Bengali meant that you had come from Bangladesh. But we all spoke the same language, and people who had lived for years. There are parts of that country between Assam, Bangladesh, Pakistan, where you can sleep in India and eat in Bangladesh. We've traveled these lands, and this part of it is mentioned, that you never know which ration card to hold, which national anthem to salute to or sing. So, yeah, so I wanted to bring out these little things through the stories that I tell. But also, my best friend was an Assamese who would call me a Bengal when he got upset, but he was my best friend. And after this book was written, Olivia and I was in Assam, and on one of the book launches, my entire class, which used to call me Bengal, all turned up. And it was such a moment of reconciliation and redemption and forgiveness for each other, So marks, so it was this way of telling the story and seeing that can I reconcile?
Yes.
Can we reconcile?
Yes, which brings me to my next question, which is about sort of the ghosts of the past and how much they haunt the present. And very much, even in your book, there's a haunted house. It's very much a theme that runs through. And there's a story right at the end. I don't know whether you want to read it or just explain it about this from the folklores and legends of Assam. All about about our destiny. Are we meant to always repeat ourselves?
I'll tell you about the story, but this haunted house story is amazing because just very close to where I lived in Milonpur, Guwahati, there was a haunted house. I lived there for 15 years. Only once a family moved in, and 3 days later they left. So no one would stay in and it's a spacious house with a massive garden, but we never saw any lights except for those 3 days. So I went back after 20 years. Of course, now it's a multi-story building, so all the ghosts of the past have vanished. But there was a haunted house in our childhood. The story you mentioned, the folklore, and is some of us will know the mythical character of Parashuram, who was a Kshatriya warrior. His father was killed by a king called Sahasrabahu. No, he was not a Kshatriya, he was a Brahmin, I'm very sorry. He was killed by a Kshatriya king called Sahasrabahu, and Parashuram decides to do the first ethnic cleansing of all times, decides to kill every Kshatriya. So he kills 21 generations of Kshatriyas, right? He just goes on this killing spree. And he's very tired, and he takes his axe and tries to clean it, but it doesn't get cleaned. Then he prays to Lord Shiva. Shiva tells him to go up to a particular spot, make a hole, and water will come out. And he does that. This is up in Arunachal Pradesh. And water comes gushing out. That is the Brahmaputra. And the place is still there called Parashuram Kunda. But what happens is that when he cleans his axe, the water turns red, right? And that is why the story goes that the Brahmaputra is red. But also, along with that story of why it's called Red River, the Assamese character is called Rizu Kalita. Kalita is a surname. Tagged along with this folk story is that people who were hiding from Parashuram's vengeance, they hid in different places under different names. They came to be called Kula Lupta, or devoid of caste. And that is the modern day. Kula Lupta becomes a modern day Kalita. So that's how all these stories merge together. So, yeah.
Yes, and then just the business of the, how can that sort of, this business of destiny, are we destined to repeat ourselves? You know, can the ghost of the past, and even in that story, where it looks as if they're always going to carry on. There's so much violence, and the past has had so much violence with colonialism and with partition, and then 1971 and of course 1984 with the Sikh thing, and that absolutely is
central part of the story.
Central part of your story, and something that you're kind of asking throughout. Are we
fated?
Are we fated? Are we fated? Maybe we should come to it again at the end. See how the conclusion is. But meanwhile, tell us about love, because there is a love story at the centre of this as well. Or there are many love stories, friendship and love, both of them sort of complicate and enrich each other, and women, and how, because the main story focuses around these three boys who become men, but women are important too.
Very.
And at one point you were going to even, I think, call the book after
the principal mother character.
The mother character. But they shift and change during the course of the novel. Tell us a bit about love, women, all that.
Love. I mean, growing up in the 80s in Guwahati as boys, all of us had love affairs, but the girls never knew. So we had this imagined stories going on in our heads, and we would fight with each other over the girl. She had no clue, right? And so this kind of comes out of that.
Beautifully realized in this book. Yeah.
All the three boys are in love with the same girl. The girl is pretty much oblivious, I think. But again, this is why I think 13 years is rewarding, is that I meet this girl after many, many years with the book, and she said, "Oh, damn, I never knew." So I was the object of your fancy. But yes, so it's very playful in that sense, that how innocent it was and how imagined it was, but deeply felt emotions. We'd live and die for and promise marriages, and here one of them carries out on their promise. So that was the and all the boys I knew were having this torrid love affairs with fingers wouldn't touch, so it's very different from now. And the other, this person, this woman, Leela, you see her coming out at the end with the agency that she has, and she wrote herself in a way. Both the women characters. The other is Lucky, the mother of Summer. Lucky just came, and the book starts with her and it ends with her. She's not anyone I have ever met in that sense. She's fragments of many strong women and stories I have heard. But she is the central driver of the book. From Dhaka, grows up in a very rich, privileged Rajbari in Dhaka, is pauperized almost by the Bangladesh war and the genocide that happened, and then how she takes on her family and what she does, and her absolute commitment and love for her son, her daughter, and her husband, and how much agency she has, and how she controls her own destiny despite what she goes through, severe personal grief. It was very... what is strange is, when you say that, is this so much of the story is personal, these are things which are completely imagined in a sense that, and experienced in a very different way of reading, thinking. But she just came one day and off she went with the story. And I really don't know where she came from. And I want to know where she's gone now. What does she do when I'm not with her anymore?
Yes, I feel your book is so full of stories that could sort of grow into other stories.
Yeah.
It's
friends have complained that, give me a
we
story.
want to know more. But yeah, and just the whole movement in the book. You've got a fabulous movement. You say Lucky is one of the people, and she does take the narrative through. But there's a whole idea of movement, and whether it's the river that sort of, is something that is a source of great comfort, for the boys when they're school children, or it becomes a place of terror later on. Yeah. How do you swim it? How do you cross it at different stages? All of this sort of thing. Movement. Can you talk a bit about movement and how you actually move? There's the river, there's the train, and there's being a refugee, which is obviously the greatest of all.
Yes.
Of all movements, of never being able to find where you can stay, where you can remain put. I don't know. Can you talk a little bit about sort of, I don't know, maybe the comfort, the escapism, the business of what it's like, what you would, how you thought of, because it's very much there in all sorts of different forms. You're always taking the story on.
This is a great thing about you being the reader, Olivia, and Olivia has read many drafts of this book, very early drafts to the final finished version, and she sees things I had never intended to be like this big metaphors, but so Brahmaputra, as I said in the very beginning, played a huge part because I don't know why I was very attracted to just sit by the riverbank and let it flow, and so that lonely, and this is when I was about 10, 11, and I used to do this repeatedly. I used to just run away from school and sit by the river. And now I go back to Assam. The riverside is unimaginably crowded and loud. But beautiful as Brahmaputra is, it's also devastating. It devastates lives every year. The floods which happen every year, the uprooting of families. It's both life-giving and life-taking. So that kind of thing that allowed the book to happen almost organically, because it's both full of stories, which the river tells you, and it also can kill. At the same time, it can be very devastating. And one of the first deaths happen in the body is found in the river. So, and I don't know if I did it consciously, but it just became a metaphor throughout that one can't swim, one can't cross the river, and that results in deaths. And that it keeps on coming up, happening throughout. You're banned from the river. There's this one family who says you'll never go to the river because bad things has happened. The river is red, so all that carries on. Other movements. I was born of migrants, and we sing different river songs. My father sings different songs, Bhattiyali songs. My father always sang, completely out of tune, but he always sang. In this book, I've made him a singer, just to give the man his due. And even here, you come, so you kind of always sit on the fence, and you're always an outsider. You're never very comfortable. So coming to London, now getting a passport, English, all of this seems to have been, if asked 30 years ago, I'd have said yes to all of these. But you just sit very uncomfortably throughout. And I guess those things come out in the book of even Samar, who comes to London, becomes a successful trader. He wants to go back. And he goes back, and the river, as Heraclitus says, that you're never in the same river twice. The river has changed. Guwahati has changed, and the stories have changed. I go back. I didn't recognize my neighborhood where I've grown up for 16 years because all the landmarks have gone. I actually couldn't find the name. So that's the change which we're talking about, the movement we're talking about. And all human history is movement, right? Migration is the central theme of civilization throughout. It has become a political movement now. It has always been political migration. So I guess I wanted to kind of, unknowingly almost, it just happened. Like now you point out this big theme so beautifully, Olivia. I didn't intend to write it in that fashion. It just kind of probably just happened, and I'm glad it happened, and I'm glad you see it, because I didn't see it when I was doing it.
Yeah. Well, I think it works beautifully.
Thank you.
And I love the elephant, which is on the front cover.
Yes.
Has this slow movement that seems to be almost dreamlike.
Yes.
The elephant features. Tell us about elephant.
Tell us about elephants.
Tell us about the elephant.
So I was in Golaghat in Upper Assam when I was doing the research for this book. My wife was then, Joji was then pregnant, and we in a tea garden, we built a small log hut, and I just stayed, being trained as an anthropologist who forgot his ways and writes story fiction now. Anthropology is fiction, but, I do it honestly. So I was an ethnographer. I was in a village interviewing people, 110 families, which comes, which is part of the book. I met this lady who just told me her story about her grandfather and her riding elephants and her stories. And again, lucky, elephant, just came together, and the elephant walked, and I walked along with the elephant and saw her beautiful stories, and that
she becomes pivotal. She's right at the beginning,
and
she's part of this extraordinary. She's the sort of sister, or sister-in-law, cousin
yeah.
of Lucky.
Lucky, yeah.
And she's kind of this wonderfully kind of wild but strange and strong character who rides in on an elephant and who keeps an elephant amidst this fabulous kind of chaotic sort of family life.
And there was this Rajbari, which this is based on the story you talk about. There is the queen of the elephants, Parvati Prasad Barua, was actually a true character, and she's alive and very much lives in Lower Assam, not Upper Assam. So I borrowed from that real life experience, took some other stories. But you might even wonder why the mother's name is Lucky in Assam. And her Bengali name is Banalakshmi, which is queen of the forest, so wealth of the forest. But the English love to name people, name places, so she becomes Lucky in Cambridge. That's how the story, first she tried to be Lakshmi, it didn't work, so she becomes Lucky. But her life doesn't live up to that thing, we all become names. So my name is Somnath, it's Som. I've been named, differently.
Yeah.
So that was also part of the story, how the English or the colonizer names you and names places in different ways. Guwahati has a different etymology of how it has been named. Now it's called Guwahati because of a different story. So naming is very important. And also in the book, Samar, S-A-M-A-R, is suddenly called Summer when he comes to England, which is S-U-M-M-E-R. And his life is not summary at all, but some girl mispronounces, mishears, and makes him Summer.
Yeah, and transforms him. And just coming now to my ultimate question, redemption. Is there any redemption? This is such a sort of a beautiful story, a story that really, really made my heart sort of sing because of the joy, but also the trauma and how you managed to sort of, in a way, weave the two together. But ultimately, is there redemption when history has made things so important, or not even history? Your life is fractured in such a big way. Where you've had your place, your personal, and your political, and your all of your life in so many different spheres has been broken apart. Is there a redemption? And I was wondering whether. Well, you tell me what you think.
I think it's such a broad question. Everyone will have different answers. But I can tell you from just my life's personal experience, So, as I said, I was born of refugees. My mother is from Chittagong, father from Dhaka. We lost everything. Oh, my father's family used to have elephants and mahouts. The mahout killed the elephant, and that next day they left. The mahout was Muslim. My father's, we were Hindus, so that clash happened. Anyway, so that's also another elephant story which started off. But, and then I look at myself, and this is not a story of success by any this thing. I'm married to a white woman whose grandparents, both sides, were in India, right? Georgie's grandparents in both sides. And, they have a North Somerset home, and I go in, even if I don't fit, I'm allowed in. And there is, I don't know if there's redemption, but there's a reconciliation. And we talk. Georgie works with Palestinian musicians and is a music promoter of the Arab world. She realizes her privileges. I take advantage sometimes of those privileges. So in that sense, there's, over time, we've moved on from the trauma of partition. Can I? Yeah. Yes, shall I read that one last? Just one little para before. Rachel always used to tell me to read enough, but old ghosts. So this is from the very last page, and Samar is writing about his father. Again, I have not read this because it makes me well up, but this is. And his father is to walk in a certain manner and sing in a certain manner, and he's mentioning this. In Bengali, there's a word for walking, paichari. It is not like an evening or morning stroll, because paichari can happen in extremely confined spaces. Unlike its closest equivalent in English, pacing, which denotes tension and worry, paichari is contemplative, thoughtful. That is how I think of Baba, walking those few feet that were available in our house in Guwahati, round and round, his hands joined at the back, deep in thought. Or he's singing, full-throated, his arms in the air. Baba loved paichari. And even when the use of his legs were taken from him, the cot of his crutches could be heard outside our room in Kadamtala. Somewhere where there is an eternal, unending sunset, Baba continues his paichari. Thank you.
I don't know whether we've got any time for any questions, if anybody has any questions. Yes? The lady, is there a microphone? Yes. Yeah.
It's not really a question. I just want to appreciate that I was very carried away, and I just think the book sounds so beautiful.
It is.
That I'm definitely going to get it. And it's quite unique because I don't usually read these type of stories which are very, sort of weaving all over the place and in depth and all the rest of it. But it sounds very poetic, and it sounds very extraordinary to me. I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. Very kind. That's all Olivia's words.
No, but it's your 13 years that have gone into it, that have given it that depth. I can feel it. Yeah, thank you.
That's very kind.
Any other questions?
We're done.
I think we're done. So there are a few copies here, if you'd like to come outside.
Yeah,
they are available outside. And otherwise...
I know, I want a copy.
Oh, you
yes.
want a copy of the book. Otherwise, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Oh, good. And job done. Thank you.
Oh,
You want a copy of it? Yeah. Oh, thank you. Let me sign this.
It's a fantastic...
Have you seen who this is for?
Oh.
I really miss him. John Singh. No, you wouldn't know. Yeah.
Name and
Have you met Faith and John? Who...
Oh, you